Welcome to the Money Insights Podcast, where high-income earners come to learn wealth-building strategies that will take them from high income to high net worth. With your hosts, financial and wealth-building experts, Christian Allen and Rod Zabriskie.
Welcome into today's episode of the Money Insights Podcast. I'm your host, Christian Allen. With me, as always, Rod the Pod Zabriskie. Rod, what's up, man?
Hey, I'm doing great. I'm usually always.
Usually always? Did you just say usually always?
I did.
That's like against the law. Never say usually always.
You said as always, and every once in a while I leave you hanging.
Okay, that's fair. You're right. You have. It was like 3 or 4 weeks ago. And so anyone listening regularly is thinking, well, okay, most of the time Rod's with you. But anyway, today I am graced with Rod's presence, and we're going to talk about an interesting topic. I think it's interesting. It's something that I've been mulling over for some time. We're going to talk about the evolution of the American dream, and then we're going to talk about its impact on wealth creation, on wealth accumulation, on how we build, right?
Yep.
So that's going to be the topic for today. And I want to start by kind of laying out what the typical American dream has looked like. And then we're going to kind of talk about like how it's evolved, but we need a starting point. So I feel like the starting point is to go back to like the 1950s, right? We can go into our parents' shoes and start to look at it and say, what did the American dream look like then? And then maybe we'll start to compare and contrast that with what it looks like today. And then we're going to bring together why it's even important when it comes to money. Does that seem reasonable?
Yeah, seems reasonable to me.
Okay, so let's lay it out. What are some of the characteristics, Rod, of the typical American dream that we just like all of us think about?
Yeah, well, one of them that comes to mind is home ownership. That's
home ownership. Good.
Classic.
That's a good one. Everybody wants you haven't established or arrived unless you own a home, right? You don't have a foundation.
Yeah.
Okay, that's kind of what the idea was. And of course, even when I was 22 years old, the advice I got from my mom, now my dad had passed, but from my mom, which I'm not sure if I should have been going to my mom for this anyway. No offense, my mom was amazing. I'm just not sure if this was her specific area of expertise. But her advice then was, Christian, you've got to get into a house as soon as possible, because if you don't, they're going to be, you're never going to be able to afford one. Because guess what? Like when I bought my first house, it was 2007, and houses were going up by like 30% a year, maybe more. And so I actually bought into that. Like, I don't know if I'm ever going to be able to buy a house if I look at how much prices changed over the year before. If they continue, I'm in trouble, right? Anyway, but my point is that hasn't really like it hasn't been weeded out. It's still very much something that I think is deeply rooted in quote unquote the American dream. Okay, keep going. What other characters?
I think if we take a step back and we say, okay, well, what is this terminology of the American dream? I think for a lot of it was the immigrants coming from different places around the world. Why are they coming? Because they can establish themselves and have, again, home ownership was that kind of arrived place, right? But there were other things as well, right? Steady work, right?
Great job, steady work, education.
Yes,
right?
Became a thing. Yep.
And maybe it didn't start that way, but certainly over, into the 70s, 80s, like that became like probably the biggest thing, because that was going to be the indicator of what your life looked like. Now, again, that's different because nowadays you've got the millennials who are like, I don't want to work for these old farts anymore. I don't want anything to do with them. There's a lot of better ways to. Anyway, we'll get to that point.
Yeah.
But I like that. Those are important ones.
As I look back, so my father-in-law was in a situation where he was working in the engineering field, but he didn't have a degree, and pretty quickly he got booted out by people who had a degree. And so for him, what he pounded into his kids is, you have to go to school. You have to get an college degree if you're going to make it, because that was what kind of killed my opportunity in my chosen direction, right?
Yeah,
so
and it makes
this
sense.
Evolution.
especially if he's playing based on those rules. Like,
Yep.
why wouldn't the message be like, hey, I want you to be better off than where I was at. This is
Yep.
what happened to me. Like, gosh, we got to make sure that the same thing's not happening to you. So I
I'm
think
glad
that's
you said
a really
that,
good one.
because that is part of the American dream as well. Building a foundation so that your kids can have it better than you had it. Right?
Yeah, I do think that's a
well.
good characteristic. Okay, so we have steady work. We have, I should say, and steady can mean a lot of different things. But I think what people were really looking for was that great job that they could make a career, right?
Mhm.
And that they could build an awesome pension so that when they retired, they could just sell off in the sunset and be able to live, another 25 years, being able to kind of, well, at least not have to worry about working. They may not be thinking at that stage like, hey, I can go do whatever I want to travel the world. I don't even know if that was probably like, that probably became an American dream a little bit later, right?
Yeah.
I don't know that it started that way. So it's just, anyway, it's just kind of interesting as we see these building blocks. Are there anything, I mean, oftentimes it's like family, right? Certainly that was an element, having a spouse and children. Like, and again, we're not saying whether these are right or wrong. We're just saying this is kind of what we think of when we're laying out that prototypical American dream from 1950. Okay, what else? What other things did we miss that should probably be part of this?
One thing probably is social mobility, because a lot of the places that people came from, if you were born poor, you just had to stay poor. Whereas
that's a great
American
point.
dream entails this idea that if you are willing to pick a direction, work hard, and succeed in your area, then you can rise in this kind of socioeconomic tier.
Yeah. I think that's a really great point. And it's pretty inspirational when you hear about these people who have, immigrants who have come from different countries and succeeded, and then like gave their children the opportunity to succeed at an even higher level. Like, it's a cool thing because not only did they achieve it in their own lives, but like they gave their posterity an opportunity to continue to grow and build on that. And that altogether is kind of, I think, what does create the American. And now, by the way, we're starting at least to get into what the American dream looks like, more like today. So, okay, so here's the deal. I consider myself a progressive. And the reason I'm progressive is because progression always wins out. I know that sounds crazy, but like, if you think about like the battles that we consistently have, I shouldn't say always, usually wins out. But normally what happens is we fight against things until we realize, oh, these are actually good and useful and valuable, right? So like, the TV initially was demonized for its new technology. You can, like, AI is certainly in that space, right? How many people are worried about AI like jumping out of the screen and taking over the world, right? So like, my take on it is usually that we'll figure out how to make the most of these. Like, we're pretty amazing as human beings and can do a lot. And so like, my thought is that generally speaking, we're going to be better off by, instead of immediately saying no to new things, we can say like, let's check it out. Like, that might be something that worthwhile, right? Anyway, okay, so why am I talking about that? Because basically what I did, Rod, is I tried to create a more progressive version of a life that worked for me. And part of it, if I'm being totally honest with you, part of it felt like it was by necessity. Like, I just genuinely couldn't see myself, like the way that I function, my health, all of those things. Like, I couldn't see myself sitting in a job or a desk for 8 to 10 hours a day,
or even a classroom,
right? That was the same issue. Yeah. I just got bored. I struggled in those environments. I needed to be doing and creating and so like, for me, that kind of a role was like, it didn't seem like the American dream. That felt like hell, right? I was like, and thinking like, ooh, I'm going to do this for the next 40 years or something similar to this. Like, that just didn't work for me, right? Or I didn't feel like it worked for me. But guess what? We were in a really great time frame over the last 20, 30, 40 years where the American dream has very much shifted, right? So now when we think of like, now they're like totally separate things. So the American dream now is I work from my house right?
Yep.
I work on my own time frames. A lot of people would prefer to work for themselves, so they're not having to have a boss, like these are again like those things that we were looking for that were like stability, or that we thought were stability. Now we're realizing that like freedom and stability actually come in different ways, right? Like, so instead of looking at the person with a steady, stable job, not that that's bad, by the way, right? These are all, none of these are good or bad. It's just, again, I'm highlighting the fact that it's changed. It's just adjusted over time. Anyway, remote work is a big one. Again, being able to do it on your own time frame, not having somebody breathe down your neck. Like, have a lot of times people really like to just get gigs, and they're like they develop a skill and then they can work for themselves. And we live in this incredible virtual world where people can go get connected and find work in 100 different ways.
Yeah.
And it's what's really interesting though is just that is more what the American dream looks like today. And can I just tell you, it is so much better for people like me, because, I would just genuinely struggle in that, prototypical system.
Yeah. Well, and what's interesting too is that the progression has facilitated that to happen. So for example, if computers didn't get to be where they are today, this wouldn't exist. Right.
Yes.
And my point on that is that 30 years ago, there was a lot of concern about, computers are going to replace a whole bunch of jobs out there. What on earth are we going to do? But what happened is that that work economy shifted as well, right? Well, it turns out that computer programming is an industry that easily replaced a lot of the jobs that were quote unquote replaced by computers. And now we're in a similar place where automation, AI, we're right in the midst of a strike of people who are saying you cannot replace our jobs with automation. In fact, what was interesting, I'm not an expert on what's going on with the longshoremen union issue right now, but what I have seen is that the company agreed to give them a 77% pay raise over the next 5 or 6 years. And obviously they're grateful for that, but their stance is you may not use automation in your systems that would replace any of our jobs. And while it sounds perfect to those people, they're like, I don't want to lose my job. And they're looking around like, hey, we don't want to lose our jobs. And yet when you look at it, again, it's easier as an outsider to look at that, but you say, well, that's progression. That puts us in a place where you can be doing other things to add value to the system. And so there are growing pains for sure, but progression really has done a lot for us to put us where we are and given us these opportunities that you've talked about.
Yeah, great point. So I want to just hit on a few. I like social proof, so I brought some stats for us. Now, I don't think anybody. I'm going to share some stats. I don't think anybody's questioning whether the culture has shifted, but it's just interesting to get like a statistical view of some of what's happening, because it really emphasizes that point. So a couple of things. We talked about home ownership. So home ownership among millennials is significantly lower than previous generations, with only 37% of millennials owning homes by 2015, compared to 45% of Gen Xers and 49% of boomers at the same age. Yeah. Right. Again, that's important because obviously if we're talking about different ages, that's not an apples to apples comparison. But specifically, they're saying home ownership has gone down, consistently goes down among people at a specific age, which again, this is like, I legitimately felt like, if I don't buy a house and get into it, well, one, I might not ever be able to because of the rising cost. But I also kind of had this feeling like this is like what you do when you take that next successful step. So like I genuinely felt some of that. And I look back on it and I think I would have been much better off had I not purchased my house. And I would have rented for, now hindsight's always 20/20. I get it, but it puts some stress. Timing certainly matters, right? I did it in 2007. Prices were crazy. So I just wish, or I look back on that and I just think like, it would have been nice if I wouldn't have had this idea that like, oh, I've got to buy this house. I've got to buy, because it was literally a financial sore spot for me for a decade, right? Because I didn't get value back out of the house. Like it turned around and has grown obviously since then, but it took me a long time just to get back to even.
Yeah.
So anyway, interesting thought. Okay. A couple other statistics that I think are cool. We talked about just kind of the adjustment in thinking, and a lot of that is becoming more entrepreneurial, right?
Yep.
And I'm a lover of all entrepreneurial spirits because that's me. So this stat like rings true and I really appreciate it. But here's the deal. The freelance economy is booming with 36% of the US workforce freelancing, contributing to 1.3 trillion of the total economy. That's a 2021 stat. So my point though is just to suggest like people don't want to work for other people anymore, right? And can I just go back to the education thing? The education model was specifically a model that was like a conveyor belt for big corporations to put in people who can do their jobs, right?
Yeah.
And over time, and again, it doesn't mean this is bad, but over time, I think more and more people are starting to feel like, okay, that's not my American dream, right? Like it's better than having to, work in the fields or whatever, but it's probably not nearly as good as if I were to go and use a specialization, a skill that I developed to help, lots of businesses grow in other ways. Like, and by doing that, I can actually have more time, more freedom, more money. That's a big deal.
Yeah.
It's a big deal.
For sure.
Okay. Let's kind of start. Oh, actually, I want to share one more. Younger generations are also prioritizing experiences over material goods. This is a huge one. We didn't really hit on it. Obviously, we talked a little bit about like houses specifically. And so this shows up in the housing statistic in the sense that younger generations don't look at housing as the ultimate goal, right? If they're looking at experiences as the ultimate goal, then there's probably a shift. And it's probably something like when they're younger, probably more interested in like travel type experiences. And then as they get older, we're probably seeing home ownership just not necessarily go away, because I still think that most people prefer or want to own their home, but I think it just gets pushed back, right?
Yeah.
Now, I think the stigma of feeling like, oh, if you don't own a home, you're not successful. Like, I think that's out the window. Although I say that, and I was in the courtroom just about a month or two ago, and one of the attorneys was laying out their case, and one of the big things that they laid out, this is great, I love this. They laid out that they had a home, actual home, and this was a divorce case, and the other person only had an apartment. And that was like, so there's more stability here. This was the best, Rod. The judge just like ripped him a new one.
Oh, really?
He was like, what does that have to do with stability, right? Like, and he made a really good point. He was just saying like, hey, like you can be in an apartment and have all the love and stability that you like. That's not an indicator of success these days.
Yeah.
So like, I saw it like on both sides, people still trying to argue it. But then, of course, it was really nice to see somebody stand up for that other side. And I just think that that's the way that kind of things are changing. And we see it with the millennial I am the millennial generation, Rod. Did you know that?
Yeah.
I'm on the very tail end of it. So this is me. I'm talking to let's see, you're a Gen X?
I think I'm Gen X. Yeah.
You're a Gen Xer. I think you are. Okay. So yeah, lots of different things happening. Let's talk a little bit about, we talked about home ownership decline. Let's talk about retirement evolving. Okay. Because now we're going to get into money. We've talked about the American dream means that I work, I get to 65, I get my pension, and 60% of my pre-retirement income is sent to me every 5th of the month on like clockwork. That's pretty dang good, right? But what we see is that, again, this idea of retiring in that way has changed a lot. So the FIRE movement, that's a big one, right? Just think about the fact that first people are like, I don't want to wait till I'm 65, right? Like this idea that, hey, should I wait 40 or 50 years until my health is declined before I try to travel the world? Like, okay, well, that may or may not work out.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And by the way, I see both sides of this, but my own dad, 49 years old, he had all of the aspirations to retire at 55 and travel the world. And guess what? He died at 49 and that never happened.
Yeah.
And so like, I look at that and like, I'm not advocating for people to be irresponsible, right? But I would advocate for people to actually look for those experiences, because if you save them for too long, you just may never get them. Yeah. So anyway, you have to come up with a good balance there. But okay, back to retirement. So our point here, Rod, is that retirement is no longer linear. Talk about what that means.
Yeah, well, one of the things is that you described retire at 65, live off the pension, everything's good. I see a lot of people retire from their whatever the regular working job was, but still working in some capacity, right?
Yeah, and that's a great point.
My own dad was an example of this. So he retired. It was a priority for him to be able to retire from where he was working and had been working for the previous 10 years, whatever. But then he's looking around. He's like, okay, now what do I do with my time? I have some of these other aspirations that I'd like to do. And so he got a part-time job, or it wasn't even a part-time job. It was like a temp. He worked for a temp agency, and then he started driving Uber. Right.
Yeah.
So, but again, it's going back to what you said earlier. It was on his own terms, but yes, he still wanted to be productive and doing things out there, making things happen, but on his own terms. He didn't have the same boss, so to speak. Right.
Yeah.
He could take the temp job.
The accountability is to yourself.
Yeah. He could drive the Uber that day, or he could not. Right. So in some ways, it's kind of like he was working for himself, even though he was, serving other people in that sense.
But that's one of the cool things about like DoorDash and Lyft and Uber is like, they've created this economy of opportunities for people who can more or less work for themselves. Like that's really what's happening. Maybe they're an independent contractor or whatever. But again, they're the ones deciding when and how and where they're going to work. And that's there's a lot of freedom that comes in that. And by the way, like fresh out of school, getting an accounting job, you're probably going to get paid about the same as you would for driving Uber, right? Except that you probably have to work longer hours. And anyway, you get the point. It's just kind of a strange thing.
But here's the other thing too, is that there are companies out there who want that recent retiree, all their experience, all of their knowledge, that they can come and, again, in this case, it was a temp job, and yet I can guarantee you they were grateful to have someone with all the experience that he had to come in and help them, again, I don't know what it was, but do that job, that project. And it was great for him. It was great for them. Yeah,
I totally agree. Okay, Rod, one of the things that we're seeing in the evolution, I'm going to throw out the stat, only 27% of baby boomers expect to stop working entirely when they retire. So back to your dad, right?
Who's a boomer?
This is baby boomers. This is baby boomers. Only a quarter of them expect to. Now, I think there's a bunch of reasons. There's probably several reasons for this. One of those, again, this evolution of the American dream used to be that I retire and then I'm good. I hang out with my spouse or whatever, and we live happily ever after, right? But now when people are there, they're like the medical community has shown the value in continuing to be productive and do those things. And so I think more and more people are like, well, that's just like a way to waste away the rest of my life. And I want to be productive. I want to do things. I want to keep myself sharp. Yeah. So it's interesting, though, that this is like the boomer generation who we're always putting out there as the old folks, right? Well, even that generation is like, I don't know if I'm just going to retire and sit on the sidelines the rest of my life. So many of them are doing other things. And, someone like your dad, what's cool about his situation is he could work Uber. He could do a temp job. He could use his skill set to do some consulting for a company. Like he could just do he could create a course online. Like there's so many opportunities for people today. And that just kind of gets me excited. Okay, I want to talk about the role of cash flow. We oftentimes talk about accumulation method and cash flow method. And can I just tell you, I really believe that this methodology is another progressive, like another form of what we've seen for like the progression of the American dream, right?
Mhm.
And what I mean is that 30, 40, 50 years ago, the retirement plan was I work my job, I put as much money into my 401k. If I have extra money, I put it into an IRA or a brokerage account outside of it. Basically, everything's invested in the market in some way, shape, or form. And at the end of this time, I have accumulated some lump sum of money, which I can go live off of. Right.
Yep.
Hopefully I've got a pension too. But again, like that viewpoint is very much evolving. And one of our goals is to help people kind of make that progressive jump into seeing the value that comes from any type of planning. So the reason I say any type of planning, Rod, is because I was having this thought as I was exercising this morning, and I was actually debating. I was debating with myself in this moment which topic we were going to hit on the pod. And I had another idea. One of my ideas was for you to argue the cash flow method and for me to argue the accumulation method. Now, again, we all know that we fit more on the cash flow method.
Yeah.
But I had this thought like, hey, we talk about wanting to bring together the best of both worlds from traditional and the reality is that there's always going to be some combination of both, right? So it's kind of silly, like, even though we consistently talk about cash flow methodology, we probably need to learn how and what to do to be most effective on the portion of our money that fits more into that kind of accumulation side of it. Because almost every successful person is going to have accumulated some lump sums of money in addition to the investments that they create cash flow from.
Yeah.
Okay. So what I view that as, Rod, and I want to get your thoughts on it, I just view this whole thing as another like sign of the progression of kind of the American dream where people are saying, okay, I don't have to do it this way. This hasn't necessarily been as effective as what I would like to see. I want to expedite or accelerate the process. All of these things come together. And so what we get is our cash flow method.
Yeah.
Maybe you should remind people what our cash flow method is really quick.
Yeah. So basically it's instead of accumulating this nest egg that you're going to turn into a stream of income or just spend down, right? Spend down off of that what you've accumulated over the rest of your life. Instead, we're creating streams of income. So real estate, royalties, whatever, right? Other notes and funds and all kinds of different things that can pay off steady streams of income so that it's not as much about how much have I built, like what's my number kind of mindset. It's more about that steady stream of income from multiple sources, again, diversified across different risk profiles so that I can expect to live the rest of my life and be okay on those streams of income.
Yeah. And our argument would be that by doing that, we're creating a much more efficient model to create the kind of freedom and stability that people want, right?
Yep.
Now, that doesn't mean that there's no benefits of having lump sums of cash.
Yep.
And that doesn't mean that there's not, some interesting, innovative ideas that we can utilize with that side of things. But again, our focus is that if you want to create wealth the most efficient, most effective way, using cash flowing investments, which oftentimes come with like inclusive tax benefits, like a lot of those elements come together and it just kind of builds on each other. Okay. So we believe in the cash flow method. I think one of these days we're going to do a battle between cash flow and accumulation. I'm going to see if I can overtake you. I think I have a pretty good argument. I started to lay it out, Rob, and I've got like 8. Think about it. You go in the accumulation model, like you've got liquidity, right? You've got optionality, right? You have, well, okay, we'll get it.
You're starting.
I'm starting. Okay. Let's just talk about kind of our ideas for listeners. Like, so what's the purpose of this? Where do we go from here? we're going to talk about how to build your new American dream and what our recommendations are for what that's going to look like. Okay, so here's the starting point. Starting point number one is that we have to have some introspection and determine what makes sense for ourselves, right? So we always talk about the situation being the boss. The situation is definitely the boss when it comes to the American dream because it's totally based on what any individual wants. So if I'm the one making this kind or like trying to figure out how do I financially create my American dream, the starting point, I think, Rod, is to actually define what that looks like.
Okay.
So that's number one.
Like it.
Okay. So then the next thing that we need to do, Rod, is we need to build diversified wealth building strategies. We need to create multiple streams of income, right? We need to especially focus on creating cash flows that will exceed our living expenses so that we're not having to worry about just covering the nut from month to month. That's got to be and is absolutely critical. And so what do? It's all the things we constantly talk about. We're talking about real estate as like probably the core asset that we can do that with. But there's a lot of other ways to do that. Just as an example, like if you wanted to create a business, so we have a business, obviously. One of my passive flows of income is just the residual and renewal money that comes off of the business. There's my point is just to say there's a lot of ways that you can create revenue if you already have an asset, right?
Yeah.
So obviously the key is if you don't have those, then maybe I should back up even further. You've just got to save. You just got to work at it, right? You got to start building something that you can turn into something else. And the other thing that I would just emphasize is alternative investments carry tax benefits. They create oftentimes more control. So making sure that that's an element of what you're doing. And again, I realize it's much easier to just stay in the traditional space. Like it's way easier to put money into my defined benefit plan, throw some money in IRAs and hope the market does the rest. At least at first. It's easier. It's not very much fun, by the way. It's a lot more fun once you kind of get into things and can like get your hands dirty, right? That's one of the other fun things about the alternative space is like it really gives you a chance to like understand money at a different level. That's another conversation. Okay, the next thing that we want to do after we've diversified our wealth building strategies, we have to leverage innovation. And this is really me saying like grab hold of this like progression that we're seeing. And innovation is one of, from my perspective, the most exciting things that we have in the money world today, because we're moving away from those stereotypes and getting to a place where people can actually take a step back, think for themselves. Oh man, Rod, I could go on another tangent. I'm thinking about there is still a problem. Like the good news is among our listeners, like people are very like, they think a lot, right? They ask really important, detailed questions oftentimes. Rod, there is also a group of people listening to our man, Dave, and they don't think at all. It's like what Dave says is gold.
Everything.
Can I just tell you, it's so painful. Anyway, back to this leveraging innovation and not being like stuck in our roots, giving ourselves an opportunity to like grab hold of things that are new and be opportunistic. I just think that's a massive element of being able to kind of take advantage of the evolution of the American dream. And I think the most important thing is just to see what it means to you so that you can ultimately accomplish it.
Yeah, being open-minded and forward-looking, because it will continue to evolve. What we're describing today, the evolution that we've seen, is clearly continuing to push forward. And so if I'm thinking over the next, again, let's say I'm at retirement age, I'm planning, okay, the next 30 years, I need to be able to create consistent streams of income. Well, real estate's going to be around, right? Whether people are buying homes or renting, either way, I can capitalize on that, right? But you think about just things that they've evolved over the last 10 plus years in terms of crypto, in terms of AI. It's being forward looking, seeing what's happening and trying to anticipate some of those things will be important moving forward.
So make your plan, but don't tap out, right?
Yeah.
Like, don't tap out of the new innovation that's out there because we'll be missing huge opportunities. I think about this sometimes, and I find myself getting into this mindset where, I'll give you an example. I hear somebody say like, oh, I was an early investor in Uber. And I was probably a little young to be an early investor in Uber, but I sometimes will get this idea in my head like, oh gosh, Uber's already there. I never have any chance to invest in Uber again. Like, I just missed it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then I have to remind myself that there's going to be hundreds of quote unquote Ubers that come along over the next however many years. And so when I say don't tap out, like, giving ourselves an opportunity to take advantage of the innovations that are just so rampant out there. Like, there's never been a better time to take advantage of innovation in the way that we build wealth and really the way that we like create our American dream. It's really a fabulous kind of amazing evolution that I think we can all like give each other high fives over.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Agreed. Yeah, totally.
Okay.
And that's, we've, in fact, at our virtual summit, right, we had a guest who is doing exactly that. He's specifically here in Utah and focused on Utah companies, the Ubers to come.
Oh, yep.
Right. And so those opportunities are absolutely there. And we have clients who have done it as well, right? Clients who are like, oh, I'm an investor in, again, I think Lyft was one of them, whatever. So
yeah, and there's going to be so many opportunities. So like moving away from that, again, prototypical American dream idea, I think is just going to be a really, not just like a practical, like better life for a lot of people, but it could also be really profitable if you're looking for opportunity. Okay. This has been Rod and I waxing philosophical about the history of the world. Thank you everybody for listening to us, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you for listening to the Money Insights Podcast. To learn more about the financial and business strategies discussed in this show, please visit moneyinsights.net. The views and opinions expressed on the Money Insights Podcast are not intended to be individual financial, tax, or legal advice. Always consult with the appropriate advisor before making financial decisions. And if you're enjoying the show, please feel free to rate, subscribe, and leave a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. This will help others find the show and learn wealth building strategies for themselves. Thanks again for tuning in, and we'll catch you in the next episode.